Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to crumble!
I'm Joshua Kemble, and welcome to Joshua Kemble's Livestream. I've been a freelance illustrator and graphic designer for over 20 years. I was an art director for 9 years. And when I'm not art directing and working on illustrations and graphic designs, I'm working on comic books and graphic novels, and that's usually what I do during my streams. And while conversations can go all over the place on this stream, from spicy and entertaining to goofy and silly, one thing stays consistent throughout every stream. I'll always be working on art. So pull up a chair, get your art supplies out, and get ready for an entertaining show that'll keep you company while you work on your own personal art projects. This is Joshua Kemble's Art Stream.
All right, welcome to my live stream. I'm Joshua Kemble. This is my live stream where I work on comics and stuff like that. So what I'm going to be working on today is shading and coloring page 71 or 171 of Not Death But Love, This Strange Supernatural Story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. It's kind of a complicated page, but it's only 4 panels, so I think hopefully at least the shading will be able to get done today, but we'll see, because it's kind of like a specific cathedral in Florence that was cited in the book that we're kind of shading and adding light and shadow to, but we'll just kind of have to see. So that's basically what we're working on. It's daytime, so you guys might not be used to seeing the light in the studio. but yeah, so that's what we're gonna rock, what we're gonna work on today. And hopefully we make good progress. Hopefully you guys are having a good day. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about stuff I've been thinking about, and let me know in the chats too how you guys are doing. Hey Dylan, I see you in the chats. How's it going? Let's go to the daily stream. Boom, here it is. So yeah, this is the page as we have it so far. While I was penciling this, I was listening to some pretty interesting stuff on like Alex O'Connor's channel about the philosophy of the mind, and that was pretty interesting. Yeah, and then just kind of working on this and listening to like other meme silly stuff too. See if I can turn up the light here. Hopefully that'll allow us a little bit more light. Maybe I can get this down. I just am noticing that the light isn't the best, so hopefully that gets the light a little better for you guys. Anyhow, so we're gonna rock shading this page. So I had a good, productive, day yesterday. For those of you who don't know, I'm working on kind of finalizing a credential, while teaching, and that's like kind of school on top of school. And so I had a bunch of work to do for that, over the weekend, like homework kind of stuff I had to get done. But I have cleared the slate so that I can just focus on comics. And I did that about midway through that day. I'm just going to add a little bit of shadow under these lovely clouds that we've got in the sky. Dylan said, I've been having anxiety off and on throughout the day. At least it's been a mild case. Ooh, that's the worst. What do they say? Depression is thinking too much about the past. Anxiety is obsessing about the future. If only we could all be really good at just being present, present with where we are. That's what I'm trying to work on, but it's easier said than done. And when you feel anxious, it is tough, because it's like, it's kind of a hard thing to fight off. Let's see here. So I've just barely been hearing about this philosophy. I haven't read much about it, so it's kind of fascinating to me. But apparently, there's this modern kind of branch of philosophy. I'm going to try to recount it. This is how I learn. I learn by talking about what I've heard and seeing if I can describe it correctly. I probably am going to fail at it because, again, in this case, this is a fresh idea for me. But the gist of this was, in philosophy, there's this kind of idea of materialism that kind of has a couple shortcomings to it. The biggest shortcoming to like materialistic points of view, the idea that everything can be broken down into matter, is that it leaves people with this problem of like the self. And by the way, we're working on comics here, guys. So if you have other topics you want to talk about, let me know. But anyhow, so it's this idea of like selfhood, like can the self be reduced to like a brain? Can you put all that is you, just in a brain and that's it? And then where exactly is the self located? Is it like all the synapses firing? Is it strange that if your self is like where your identity is located in your brain, that you can feel pain in other parts of your body? Like, even though they say it's your brain, right, that's kind of causing pain receptors to register pain. It's like if I pinch my finger, right, I feel pain in my finger. There's just some like weird issues with materialism. And the main issue is the idea of self. So there's this new branch of philosophy that I am really unfamiliar with because like I'm an art major. But I guess the gist of it is, rather than going from the material and from the material observations, and trying to kind of work reductively from that, they're kind of remembering like, wait, the whole purpose of science in general is to record observations of things, but they don't say whys and whats of things. So like the point being like, science can kind of tell you how something works that's been observed, and then predict what nature will do next based on the observations, right? Like if something's observed enough times, they can postulate like what'll happen next. But science is rarely able to give you like the why of it. So a good way I've heard this boiled down to is like, science can tell you what is in tea. They can tell you if somebody put strychnine in their tea to serve to their grandma, they can tell you what that's going to do in the tea, what that's going to do to your grandma, what happens if somebody gets poisoned with strychnine. But it rarely is going to postulate whether it is moral or not to put strychnine in somebody's tea. And also, it's not going to really be able to get into realms of like why someone would be motivated to do that. So that's kind of starting to go into areas that are not science. So the idea is that the whole idea of science is built around the mind, like it's built around perception. This is me trying to recap it. Dylan said, like, new as in modern or new to you? I think it's new to me. I think it is a newer field. I'm gonna forget what it's called. It's called like I don't know. I don't remember the term for it. But it's kind of a newer branch of like mind philosophy of the mind that people are starting to observe and kind of consider. So I guess the big thing with it, hey Scott, how's it going? What you up to, bud? Hopefully you're working on some cool stuff. So anyhow, I'm trying to recap to see if I fully understand it, because like again, I just listened to a thing about it while I was working on pencils, and now I'm trying to see, like, I'm testing my learning. So I guess the gist of it and I'm probably going to get this awfully wrong, but the gist of it is, the thought for the last like few hundred years when it comes to philosophy has been that at some point we're going to find the material that basically composes the self, like the material that causes the sensation of self. And what's been kind of an interesting thought that people have brought up is the idea that maybe it's actually the reverse, that it's like that what we're observing, like the material things we're observing, are actually thoughts, like are actually like ripples. And this is like, I guess, something in physics, right? Where it's like in physics we have things like atoms, and we've reduced things down to like quarks and like these small components, but all these things are like ripples in like a field. Like we don't like, there's no such thing as like half the things we're using in science to like define things. Like these are convenient. The guy who was being interviewed that I was listening to called them convenient fictions, right? Like science is about finding kind of convenient fictions or convenient analogies for us to understand and predict and use, right? So it's like when we're talking about like molecules and things like this, these aren't things of actual, like a lot of the time they aren't things of actual substance. Like they've kind of started realizing a lot of these things are actually like fields rather than like objects themselves. So anyhow, I guess the idea that they were kind of postulating, and I can't go on about it too long, so I'm just going to kind of try to or summarize it, not hypothesize it. The idea that this guy was getting at was like, what if what we're actually observing is the process of mind? Like, for instance, like a bigger mind or something like that. So the idea being, much like we have collections of things like neurons in our brain that are firing, that are collectively giving us a conscious experience, what if consciousness is actually what derives material? And I guess the gist of it is not like what they were clear about was like, and keep in mind, I don't know if I agree with this. It was just really interesting. But the gist of it was they weren't making the claim that like you can consciously make matter, like exist or cease to exist, but that that what we observe, like, is it possible that like what we're observing in the world is like a collection of things that compose conscious beings, right? And that the material things, instead of it being mind over matter, like mind over matter, like matter being first and then mind being composed of matter, which is the general thrust of science, right? Oh, nice. Scott said working on Kickstarter fulfillment. So I guess the general thrust of modern science has been kind of moving in this direction of like, well, mind comes from matter, right? Like the idea that like everything has like a physical source. So we're going to kind of break things down to a physical force. But this is a newer kind of philosophy that isn't all that new. Like there's like much of philosophy, I think it ties into a lot of like weird ancient philosophies and stuff. But more and more, I guess, both physicists and philosophers are starting to consider the idea that like, what if it is actually mind that comes first and then matter next? Meaning like that there's consciousness preceding matter, and that this substrate that causes, that where we're seeing these vibrations that create, like when they look at nothing in a contained experiment, when they isolate and suck out every molecule from like a container, they still observe like different things like zipping in and out of what seems like zipping in and out of existence. And this is what made people think like, oh, these things like quarks, they aren't actual things. They're ripples in a, like, the better way to look at it would be like a ripple in a wave. Paul said whitehead. I don't know what that means. You gotta let me know. Is that kind of what this idea comes from? Or do I have like a big old whitehead on my on my face? Dylan said it sounds like it comes from occult pagan philosophy, practice, and beliefs. There's a lot of like belief systems that have this this vast idea of like a large conscious being that the whole of humanity like composes in reality. I think the most common one I would think of is like old Hinduism, where the idea that we're like kind of all part of this like broader living being. Anyhow, so there's definitely a little bit of I think that's what is that called, Vedism or something? I don't know. But I would think that would be like one of the more ancient kind of versions of this. But anyhow, the idea is that like scientifically, like they're thinking that there might be kind of some value to looking at things from that perspective, rather than looking for the matter that's causing mind. Maybe start looking for the mind that's causing the matter. Like if they start approaching it from the viewpoint of this substrate that reality kind of exists on, coming from thought and consciousness, then maybe there might be like a little bit more ground being made in the fields. And I thought that was interesting. I have no idea what I think of it. I definitely don't think we're all part of some collective, kind of thing. I think there's definitely more connections and things between people, but I don't know if I believe the idea of all of us like being like a little synapse in a giant brain. I don't know, but it was interesting. It was really interesting. They went on about it for like a good few hours, and I found it fascinating. I haven't heard or read enough of it to like look into it much deeper, but I might have to, just because it was, I don't know, it was interesting. Oh, Paul said philosophy of Whitehead. Is that what that is? But yeah, I guess that the general gist of it is just the idea that that things, like maybe when we're looking at things, we're actually like the thing itself is only a thing because of our conscious experience of it, right? And I mean, this is a thing that philosophy's always talked about. Like, what is the chair, right? There's classic art done about this, where it's like there's 3 depictions of a chair. There's the word chair, right? And usually they'd pair that with something that's not a chair, like a photograph that's not a chair. And then there's a chair, right? But it has no name. And then there's like a third thing where it's like the idea is like, what is the true reality? What's the real chair, right? This is not a pipe thing, right? Like where it's like a picture of a pipe, but it says this is not a pipe. Like, which is the pipe? Which is true, right? It's an old kind of not like too profound idea of like, the idea that you have signifiers and then the signified, and usually what we find meaning in is the signifier, which is the thing that's giving. This is so dreadful to go through, because I had to go through this in studying like art history and stuff. But like the idea being the signified, the thing that we signify as having meaning, is not necessarily the same meaning as the signifier, right? Which is what it's labeled with. So anyhow, if you think about it, it's like, just in basic rationality, like the idea that and this is me, again, I'm just kind of working on art, just thinking out loud. But the basic premise of it is like, if I have a cup of coffee here, right? And science can tell me all kinds of things about this cup of coffee, right? And they're all observable things. Like they're all observations of what that coffee is. It could tell you how hot it is. Right now it's relatively cold. So it could probably postulate how recently I heated up the coffee if it can prove that I heated it up. It can tell you like what the container is and how the container that has the fluid in it is retaining that fluid. It can tell you the combination of things that are within the coffee. But what it can't tell you is the sensation of drinking coffee. Why, like, it's kind of like it can tell you the synapses and stuff that cause you to see the color yellow, right? Or the color of coffee, brown, right? But it cannot necessarily tell you like what brown is, though. Like, you know, the area of what is not science. I don't know if that makes sense. Like science deals with what is observable, but doesn't have much to do with like like for instance, here's what science would have difficulty answering without going into other realms like philosophy, right? A scientist technically would have trouble understanding, why did I have a cup of coffee? Like, was I tired? Why was I tired? Why do I like coffee? Why do I drink coffee in this specific mug? Why did I get this mug? Right? Why like it won't be able to tell you the story about how my wife bought me this mug that has a stupid pun on it that says nuts about you, and it has 2 peanuts, right? It can't tell you the story behind it. It can just basically give you observations and statistics and predictions. Like if it observed me long enough, it could be like, well, this guy will likely drink coffee at this time because they seem to drink coffee at this time every day. So Dylan said, science keeps proving some spiritual, occult, philosophy, practice, beliefs are real. I think the thing is, I don't know if that's I don't know if it's proving that. I think it's more like there's ideas that are older that have some truth to them. Like there's truth to like things that catch. Like I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like you know, there's truth to wisdom. And there's truisms that kind of overlap different fields. So in that case, I'd kind of agree with you. So this isn't a fault of science. It was just like, I guess the idea of this philosophy is saying maybe we're approaching this wrong. Maybe instead of looking for the material in the immaterial, maybe we should be looking for the immaterial in material. It's just kind of saying like, what if we tried it different? And I thought that was fascinating. I don't know where that leads, but it was definitely an interesting idea. But yeah, I don't know. I think like this kind of thing blows my mind a little bit, like to a point where I don't quite understand it. Like even the idea of reality as we see it, all material being composed of these things like atoms and particles and, you know, things like that. But like when you really break down those things, they're just kind of placeholders for like these waves, these particle waves. Like that to me is really hard to, like, my brain has trouble comprehending that. So like, you know, I don't know. Like to me, all of this stuff is like mystical and weird. The idea that, but the idea of like the, rather than approaching things as a pure materialist, thinking about things as like a process of mind is really interesting to me. It's just really interesting. I don't know. But yeah, the selfhood, all that stuff is pretty fascinating. I think people can overthink things quite a lot. including myself, I'm an overthinker, and I think that tends to lead to things like anxiety or depression. Like I think sometimes it's better to just chill, you know. Maybe like that old idea of what was it in the was it Sarda who had the idea that maybe at some point, you know, we just accept that we are Sisyphus and just kind of roll the boulder happily. That, you know, like it's like because at the end of the day, like, you know, overthinking it can lead to like a pretty miserable life. I don't know where I go with it, because I can't, like, I think most people who are really interested in like philosophy or thinking, probably if they're listening to this would be annoyed because my thinking's not so deep. But I think people who think about those things, it's not like something you can turn off, like, you know, thinking about like the why of things. But I think it's really interesting that like back in the day, philosophers used to, like, the origin of philosophy. You know, from what I've read of it and stuff, it seems like it was mostly about how do we live a good life? Like, how do you live a good life? What is the good life? Like, those questions were kind of what drove early philosophy. A lot of it was like thinking about like, how do you live a good life? And then I think it just kind of has, I think there's times where the function of it fails. Like there's definitely like a place for philosophy, and it often branches out into other sciences, right? Because it's like thinking about why tends to lead to discovery. So it's like you end up with, you know, some pretty amazing things like kind of coming out of somebody just, you know, getting hit on the head with an apple and being like, I wonder why is that the apple fell down rather than, you know, flew up? Like, what is that thing that's causing that to, you know, what are these strings pulling these items down when they fall? Like that, it seems like an artificially silly question, right? And it's like, possibly like overthinking might have seemed kind of silly to a lot of people at the time, but that overthinking brought like rockets to the moon, you know? So it's like, there is benefits. There are benefits to like thinking about stuff. But it's interesting to me because it's like, I always find it, okay. Oh, that's where I was going. So I have a friend who's an engineer, and he does like, you know, he works on like supersonic jets and stuff. Like he's like a big engineer up in like, you know, he's worked at Lockheed and Grumman and Northrop and Grumman, and he's worked at NASA, and he's worked for Edwards Air Force Base. There's a lot of engineers in the area I live because we're right next to one of the biggest Air Force bases, right? We're really close to Edwards Air Force Base, and we're also really close to the California NASA. So that's like a huge industry out here. Like a lot of rocket scientists live near me. But I remember when he was talking about some of the stuff that's bizarre, like about engineering, and he was talking about lift in an airplane. There's a formula for it, but they don't really understand why. like there's a lot of things in the design of an airplane that work and started as a hypothetical based on some formulas that kind of make sense, but like there's no why to it. There's no like underlying it all. They don't really understand what gravity is. And it's Dylan said, wait, NASA has a California location? Yeah, it's where the we actually have a dry lake bed here where a lot of the space shuttles landed. So we actually got a couple shuttle landings out here on the dry lake bed out in Roseman. And then there's actually a street in Lancaster called Challenger Way, and it was named Challenger Way because when they brought the Challenger back to NASA to work on and fix, because like, these shuttles, the old shuttles, they used to kind of relaunch multiple times. And so they'd, it would land in Florida and then it'd get shipped over here. It'd fly on one of those big, big airplanes. And then they would take it on the back of a truck down Challenger Way. And Challenger Way, the reason it was called Challenger Way is like they had to widen the street to fit a space shuttle. So yeah, we have one of the big NASAs. Yeah, we're one of the primary NASAs. I think there's one in Florida, one in Houston, and one in California. Not too far from Edwards Air Force Base. So there's a lot of engineering here. Yeah. Dylan said he's talking about a video by Alex O'Connor. It was an interview where Alex O'Connor was talking to a dude about that. Paul said a long time ago, my dad worked for NASA in Massachusetts. Yeah. It's pretty cool, too. As a kid in elementary school, we often got to go to NASA and do little tours and stuff. I never got to go to space camp. That sounded like it would have been really fun. But or you'd get to go tour the Air Force Base and look at like a parked SR-71. Like that was really cool as a kid. Like, seeing these like giant plane hangars with like crazy cool airplanes in them. And when I was a kid, because of the area we lived in, the SR-71 was like the coolest plane on the planet. Yeah, you always know somebody's not from this area if they hear a sonic boom and they jump. Because the sonic boom kind of sounds like an explosion in the sky, and it shakes like the house and the ground. It goes like kaboom, like crack. It's like a snap of a whip. And even as a teacher now, it's like whenever there's a sonic boom, I know which students just moved to the AV. Because I'm like, yep, welcome to the Antelope Valley. And you see weird stuff out here all the time, which might be one of the reasons I'm a big skeptic about like, people who talk about like aliens and things like that. I've seen so many weird things in the sky that had very rational explanations later on, like the stealth fighter we had, or the stealth bomber. Sorry, we had a bunch of those flying over us before they even announced the thing existed. So pretty much everyone in the Antelope Valley knew there was this like weird triangular plane they were developing. And initially when it was flying out, in the sky, people would think like, oh my gosh, it's an alien. It's an alien spaceship. And the more rational explanation won out. But there's definitely some spots, because I went to Rosamond for like high school, unfortunately. Not that it was a bad school. It was a bad school. But yeah, so like I was up, in a school that was like real close to there. So a lot of friends of mine would do stuff like, off-roading and things like that. Desert things. Okay. When we were in high school. And there were definitely a couple times where we'd be like out exploring the desert and, late at night, and you'd run into that fence, and those guards that would be like, you can't be here at this time, like that kind of thing. You'd like be out in the middle of the desert, suddenly spotlights come on and you're like, what the heck? And it's like, no, this is Air Force property, or this is NASA property, or this is Lockheed property, like whatever it was. There's so much of that. Dylan said, I saw a shooting star a few nights ago. Nice. Paul said he worked at NASA in Houston in 1969. That's where I was born. 69. All right. Paul said, that's why they landed on the moon. My dad was some sort of screw turner. Cool story, though. That is awesome. I have a buddy who does electronics there. He does soldering, on big airplanes, and he'll be like, I work on jet planes. People are like, cool, what do you do? And he's like, solder electronics. And they're like, oh. And how he learned to solder was on guitars. He's a nice guy. But anyhow, the other thing you get used to is like people who can't talk about what they worked on till like 20 years later. Like my good buddy who I was talking about, who was talking about how much is ununderstood in engineering. It's like we understand it works, but we don't know why. That kind of stuff. Like a lot of it's like more trial and error, I think, than people realize, I guess, from what I hear. But anyhow, he wasn't able to talk about like a plane he was working on for like 15 years. And then finally they announced that it was out. And he's like, yeah, I was working on that. But it's like, can you imagine like just, you know, not being able to talk about your job? I don't know. I'm such a talker. I just would have trouble with that. I don't think I could do like a classified job. I don't know if I'd do well at that. Paul said, you are a shooting star. Nice. But anyhow, I don't know. There's an old saying where there was the let's see here. I guess like back in the day, you know, in Greece, I think, people would go to this like person who would, you know, basically like, you know, prophesy. Like it was like the I'm blanking out on the name for them. You guys might remember, but it was like the prophets at the time. It's like these women who lived in the temple, quite often lived near, like they had built the temple that they had like right next to like kind of a fault, an area in a fault line where like smoke came out from the earth, and they thought it was some sort of mystical property. So they'd have like, you know, these sects of women, you know, basically like one at a time, and it would be like an inherited position, where you would go and you would talk to this person for like wisdom. And I guess there's this old story where Plato, I believe, like walked up to this lady, right? He had booked his time with them. And yes, an oracle. Thank you, Dylan. See, I'm smart. I don't remember. Paul said I'm a blabbermouth. Same. Yeah, same here. I don't even remember oracle, but yeah, so they'd go like, so I guess there's this story where like Plato goes to this oracle and asks the oracle, like, who is the smartest person in Athens? Like, who's the smartest person? And she responds with, it's Socrates. And he's like, why is it Socrates? And she said, because he's smart enough to realize, like, to have said that he doesn't know anything. And like, I don't think I'm very smart, but if that's a symbol of wisdom, then I guess maybe I'm a little wiser. Because I like, anytime I think about anything, especially outside of my expertise, like my expertise is art, and I feel like I've barely, you know, grazed the surface of how to do this thing we're all doing, right? I feel like I learn new things every day. Even students of mine who are like in high school will do something cool where I'm like, how did you do that? And then I learn something cool every day, or a different approach, or just something new. So I don't know, like whenever I think about things like that, things like flight or, you know, invention, or like magnetic fields, magnets, how do they work? Is that I don't know. I know there's the Insane Clown Posse, which I am not a fan of. I don't know if you knew that. I'm not a big fan. But I think they had a song that got clowned on the internet where he said, magnets, how do they work? Yeah, magnets, man. But anyhow, I kind of feel like that sometimes about things. Like, I definitely forget how everything works. Like, the things you remember, I think, are often just what's applicable to your everyday, you know? But like, even the resonance of guitar strings and how a pickup generates like an output for the sound that vibrates from these strings to make like the sound of an electric guitar. All of that is really seems really mystical to me. And I know there's like a science behind it. I know there's a breakdown of it, a logical reason, but there are times where I like to just brain flood, like give myself, something to think about that I have never heard before, and then probably will forget in like a week, or bring up randomly in a conversation. But I did like the idea of like, just kind of like matter being a process of mind was really interesting to me. But yeah, I don't know. I love that kind of stuff. I probably in another life would major in philosophy, but I don't know if I have the wherewithal or the patience to do that nowadays. But I think it would be a fun thing to like learn more about, and actually study academically. I feel like even if you studied it academically, though, it's like you'd almost have to pick like thinking about like history majors or like mostly like thinking about like things like in the humanities, like history or an English major. Do you really, within the time of a bachelor's degree, have the time to kind of like really deep dive into things? I'm thinking about it like when I was getting my BFA, I was getting like an overview of like the whole thing, like how to do illustration. But it's like, it never got like niched down and specialized. You got like a flavor of a bunch of different things and like a knowledge, like a passable knowledge of these things. But you were never really like, you were kind of just sponging things up. And I kind of feel like if somebody was to go into philosophy, right, like studying philosophy, in academia, I would imagine the first thing would be just like a broad overview. I doubt you're going to get like crazy specialized into like one specific branch of philosophy. And then maybe for like certain papers, maybe you'd have to do like a deep dive and dig in. But I'd imagine if you went into something like that, the most fulfilling kind of college experience would be doing something like a master's or a doctorate where you could really drill down. But even in those scenarios, like I always wonder how people can feel really cocky with whatever knowledge they have, because it's like you're so limited. And I don't mean you in particular. I just mean just thinking autobiographically. I feel like I'm pretty limited on what I know, to like what I need to know. Like I've learned quite a bit about Victorian England for this book. That some of this I will probably not remember after the fact, I don't even remember the name of the specific type of there was a specific type of carriage I had to look up, and I found it, and then I forgot very, very quickly what it was called. But it was like pretty much like the equivalent of like a taxi back then, that kind of carriage. And I needed to know what it looked like for, what I was doing, but it's like it didn't really store well later on. Paul said, they don't know why my surgery works, but it does. And then Dylan said, you're like Barbie, you're dancing with everyone. And then you ask, do you ever think about dying? It worked on the last guy, so let's do it on Paul, said Paul. I don't know. I mean, like, that's the thing. A lot of the time, they kind of have a rough idea, but it's interesting to me how much a lot of this stuff, we're figuring it all out as we go, We're figuring it out, Let's see here. Okay, so we've got a little bit of this panel going, And now I'm pretty optimistic because this one's gone pretty quickly. I think the colors are going to take forever on this, but the shading's not taking forever, which is a positive sign. Oh, I was doing these in the wrong order. I needed to have this. I ought to make a copy. We got to move and merge my border down here. All right. And then we've got... But another thing that's interesting is like things like perspective. Like I didn't quite understand why perspective worked when I was learning it, you know. But now that I'm teaching it, I've kind of looked into a little bit of like the science of why it works, like what a vanishing point is, the logic behind it, right? And it's a very rational thing based on observation. You know, it just took humans like, you know, a really long time to figure it out. And then I think for 2 point, I think 1 point was discovered in like the 1400s. And then I think 2 point, they didn't really crack 2 point perspective till like the 1500s. Just kind of wild that we were like, we kind of had this rough idea of what we were trying to do with art, but like it just took us a while. All right, so we're going to do our... do I want it to be lighter towards the horizon? I think I do. I think here I want it to be a little bit brighter, and then it's going to get a little darker as it goes up. And we'll color hold the sky quite a bit. So anyhow, there was that. I probably today I did a little bit of music. I think the next album might be fully recorded on a Strat because I've been just really in a Stratocaster vibe. So I might not like the last album that I did, which is out right now and you guys should check out, called Empty Rooms. But the previous album I worked on was like alternating different guitars on every track, but like the first track that I finished for it kind of had a Dylan said I didn't know that about perspective. Yes, you're right. I did his shadow wrong. I do actually need to adjust his shadow. Thank you, Paul. Let me find it. That kind of bugged me too, because I was adding all of their shadows on kind of the right, and then I added his there. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So we'll fix that. Thank you, Paul, for the heads up on that. I thought it, and then I kind of forgot. But yeah, like, so the general premise of perspective is literally just built on somebody observing a cube, like in reality, and then going, oh, like the front of the cube is pretty much parallel to the back of the cube if it's facing me, like if a side of it is facing me. And then the sides of the cube that are going backward in space, like if I drew a line next to those sides, they go all the way to the horizon, kind of like the two sides of a road, and then like meet, and then they disappear. And what's weird is like whatever side I look at as the front side, the sides that recede in space all seem to connect at like the same point. Well, you know, and then vanish. So I'm going to call that a vanishing point. And then 2 point was just when some jerk, after they had 1 point figured out, came along and was like, okay, you've got this, right? You've got your front, right? You've got your parallel back. You have your sides that recede and meet at a vanishing point on the horizon. What about this? Ha ha ha. Right? And with this, now you have the corner as the front, and the sides go off to one and go off to another side. But they never meet and they go and vanish at the horizon. But these two receding sides don't ever meet like in 1 point. So that's where they were like 2 point. By the way, I just got this lovely postcard from Sean Tiffany that worked as a great thing. Dylan said, yeah, I thought about it, but I forgot me about every day. That's me all the time. Losing my shading logic here. I do want to kind of add a little bit of substance to this background. But anyhow, like it that didn't logically connect with me for years, you know. I just kind of used 2 point and 1 point, you know, because they worked, but I didn't really understand why for a really long time, why they work. Which is interesting, you know. But it's funny to me that like people took forever to figure that out. Like we kept trying to kind of get it right. And then it was a couple guys in Italy in like the 1400s who were like, hey, we figured this thing out. And back in the day, that's when like artists were like part of, you know, like there were like a lot of secret guilds at the time for, you know, like metal working and arts and all sorts of other careers. And it's very much a society where you'd be like kind of inheriting knowledge from either somebody you mentored under or from like a parent, you know, because people didn't really get to choose what they do for a living. And because of that, like even then, like perspective was like this closely guarded secret, you know, a very closely guarded secret for a really long time. So it was like, you know, like those artists in Italy kept that real close to the chest at first when they discovered it, you know, because they were like, hey, this is like, you know, this is a trick of the trade. I don't want to pass it on too quickly, you know. Let's see here. And again, I probably would have been a horrible artist back then because I've never been good at being like, this is a secret that I'm not going to share with anybody. Like, just never been good at that. All right. We have our first panel kind of worked on. I want to increase his shadow a little bit. We're going to increase some shadows here. My son just got back from a birthday party he was going to. Sure, they partied hard. All right, let's see here. I gotta say, man, the elementary schools give kids a lot of homework. Like, it's kind of wild how much homework they give. All right, let's merge all this, and then let's move on to the next one.
Okay, well, we'll just leave it as such.
Dylan said, what about a fisheye perspective? Fisheye is interesting. It's kind of built on a grid perspective system. So like you kind of build it around like a 4 point. Dylan said, I hope he had a rad time. Paul said, I'm making soup. Nice. Soup is delicious. We made like a stew the other day. My wife made a stew the other day. Not we. I made some bomb grilled cheese sandwiches the other day.
Josh makes a killer grilled cheese.
I am really good at grilled cheese. I can make things that are simple and can be fried. That's basically my skill.
Which is funny because I'm actually bad at those.
So we've got our clouds. And just to give this some differentiation, I'm going to go ahead and... You know what? We're on a deadline here. Should we make the shading... Let's do a quick shading cheat because we're on a deadline. I was going to make the shading all over again, and I realized I don't need to do that. So we're going to use this and repeat it. Oh, come on. I thought we could do that. Can we do that? Hold on. This might pull over. Now, Josh that's not on a deadline would not do that. I would actually reshade the entire thing. But this is Josh on a deadline. Does that match up? Kind of does. There's a little bit that'll have to be reworked, but that saves a lot of time. Okay. Let's add a little bit of shade here. And then I want to add just a tiny bit up here just to give it some texture-y stuff. Lovely. Lovely. All right, so we're going to erase some of this stuff and kind of work it in there, but that definitely saves a lot of time. So I can kind of start getting into... And again, if I weren't on like a deadline crunch, just to give it more variety, I would probably have reshaded this whole thing rather than borrow it from the previous panel. Because I feel like repeating panels, generally, I try to redraw every time, just so there's like that slight fluctuation. But we're on a deadline, so we don't have that luxury. Although I'll give it some semblance of that by like adding shading here. We're trying to kind of match it. Old Man Dick Grayson from DCKP Fight Night. What is DCKP Fight Night? I have no idea what that is. Is Old Man Dick Grayson? Dick Grayson was like that's Robin, isn't it? And then he like inherited, I can't remember. There was like a whole thing. I didn't really follow Batman as a comic when I was younger. Might seem weird, but it was never... DC was not my jam. I did like Batman. It wasn't a bad comic. It just wasn't like my on my pull list as a kid. I did love Batman the Animated Series, though. And I also really, really liked the original Batman, like the TV show, which to this day I think is probably... I think Adam West's Batman is possibly the best Batman ever made. Like, over The Dark Knight, I feel like Adam West Batman is my jam. But I think if you're going dark Batman, Christopher Nolan's is really hard to beat. I haven't even watched the recent Batmans. I feel like there's just too many Batmen. I know they did one that was like a dark gothic detective one. Tim Burton's was really cool when I was a kid too. Also Prince did a good soundtrack. All right, we're getting there, guys. We're doing a little bit of touch up for for panel 2. Dick Grayson was the original Robin, but he put on the cowl on a few times. Yeah. We saw, what was that? I can't remember. My wife might remember, but Ben was watching like a Batman animated special that was like a Christmas special, and it was like super stylized and cool. And the plot of it was all about like Batman's kid. Like it was really interesting. But it was like really strange. Like the way it was done was very like cartoon modern. And it was pretty incredible. But it's hard for me to keep track of all the Batmen and all the Batman movies and stuff. Like I'm so not a DC guy that I didn't even see Justice League movie. We tried to watch Superman a while ago, not the recent one, the one that just came out. I think I might like, but the one prior to that, it was hard for my wife and I to watch because it was like so badly edited. I think it was a Zack Snyder thing, and I never really liked the Snyderverse stuff, so we didn't really follow much of that. So I acknowledge there might be better stuff that we just haven't seen recently. Paul said the most recent Robert Pattinson Batman was good. My favorite so far. Yeah, that's the one I would imagine. I don't know. I liked the idea of it, that they were going back to like him being like the detective. And so from what it looked like with the trailers and stuff, it looked like they were going kind of a hard-boiled detective kind of route, which I think would be really cool. So in theory, I'm for it, but I haven't seen it, so I don't know. But I'm starting to get superhero burnout, like to the point that I did when I was originally into superhero comics. Like when I was a kid, like superhero comics were my jam. And then when I got into like, why am I wearing headphones? I don't have to when I'm doing solo stuff. That's great. So when I got into like superhero comics and stuff, like I just found them to get really repetitive. And ended up getting really into indie comics. Like that just kind of happened pretty naturally around like 8th or 9th grade. And then I missed a lot of the New 52 and everything kind of after that. Like I kind of just checked out at the point where like Image Comics kind of imploded. And I was like all about the Image Comics boom when it happened. I was like, you know, a huge Spawn fan and fan of the Max and stuff like that. But like, have not been like an avid superhero comic reader for a long time. And then I was kind of digging a lot of the movies as they came out, but I'm starting to get like the same feeling of like superhero fatigue from superhero movies, where I'm like, I'm sure I will watch some again, but like, I just kind of, I've been experiencing a lot of superhero fatigue. Chris said the Batman was surprisingly more like a noir. I liked it. Yeah, that's what I heard, and that's what I think. I think I might actually dig it, because I do kind of think doing it as a detective is a good call. That's kind of an angle they haven't taken in the films. They sort of did in the Tim Burton Batman, but that was a lot more kind of gothic and like over the top. And again, like, you know, for people who weren't alive at the time, those were amazing movies for kids. You know, that was like peak time for me of like superhero interest. And so to see like a superhero movie treated somewhat, you know, somewhat seriously was like really like cool for the time. Like it was a very revolutionary thing, and it was really cool as a kid because it was like the Batmobile was cool, and seeing it as like a real vehicle and stuff, like, you know, it's hard to kind of take people back to a time where like that just wasn't a thing like happening. Like people had tried it prior. I think the only time they had really successfully done it before that was like the Superman movies with Christopher Reeves that I grew up with. But like, you really didn't have a lot of superhero content at that time. So like, the Tim Burton one has like a soft spot in my heart for that reason. Chris K said Batman went more like hunting the Zodiac with the mob movie schemes. Nice. So we have these things going. But yeah, I don't know why. I in my heart and soul still love superheroes, but I have that same disinterest and fatigue that I had as a kid. Like it's gotten me again. I got hit by the disinterest and fatigue with the genre. But to be fair, I'm not really watching a ton of movies right now. I'm on a book deadline, so like I can listen to podcasts and like weird speculations and stuff. Hopefully I'm kind of filling that for you guys too when I live stream. Just something you can kind of put on and work on art in the background, because like it is, you know, as you guys know, when you're working on like an art project, it's not like I can watch like a crazy superhero movie in the background. Like that would just pull my attention too much, because it's so much about spectacle. You know, the superhero genre should be about spectacle. Like it can be about plot and stuff like that, but you better have some good spectacle if you're doing superhero stuff, right? And so you can't really, I don't know. I know some people who can have like films on with like a lot going on, like visually, but when they work on art, I never understood how they can do it, because like my single focus kind of brain just can't process while I'm like watching something like that. So that might be part of why I've been feeling superhero fatigue too, is just like I'm on a crazy deadline. So, you know, my time, my watch time is usually not allowing for like superhero stuff. But it's also not, well, like I haven't really had a moment of like, I have to see that, like, you know, like with superhero stuff in a long time. Just that like kid-like excitement. I don't feel it right now, you know? I have to say the Superman trailer, the latest Superman trailer, I do want to see that. I think I would dig it. It looked really cool, and it looked like it was going back to like a wholesome Superman, which I think is needed. Penguin series was really good. He said Colin Farrell disappears into Cobblepot. I actually liked the Penguin series. I was watching that when it was happening. I think it was like the first 2 seasons were really cool, and then I feel like something weird happened with it. Like I feel like it fell off. Am I wrong? But I thought originally it was like really, really well done. The Penguin TV series, like the first season especially, was pretty cool. Oh, it was a prelude to the Batman. Okay, so it's kind of in that vibe. Well, then I probably would like the Batman. The Batman. You know what would be funny is if they had a sequel called A Batman. The Batman. A Batman. Some Batmen. Some Batmen. Anyhow, I don't want to trash the whole genre. I'm just kind of over it, like, right now. I think there's seasons in life for different genres, and like for me, I've kind of put that genre to bed for a little bit. I'm feeling a little burnout on it. Not that there aren't good movies in it. There's a lot of good movies in it. It's just like, I don't know. Can we tell other stories, please? I don't know. I'm a grumpy old man when it comes to that stuff, you know. These superheroes. All right, we're getting there. We're getting there. Working on it. Superman was very fun. A good indicator. Victor saw it in like a dozen times. Yeah, if Victor was all about it, that's a good sign. Because our friend Victor is like the Superman connoisseur. He'd be the guy I'd talk to because I wasn't a DC kid. So like anytime I needed some DC knowledge on like what happened in Superman issues and stuff, Victor would be my go-to because he knew like everything there was to know about Superman. All right. Out of curiosity, do you guys get superhero fatigue though? Like, I feel like it's a thing, right? I don't know. Do you guys get that at all? Like, just kind of where you're like, I don't really want to watch another. Like, I don't know. I don't know, man. Yeah. It's like I love kung fu flicks, and I will go through seasons of like all I will watch for like I've had years where all I would watch were like just hordes of kung fu flicks, you know? Because they're the best. Like, they're great. They're fun action flicks and stuff like that. But then like I would hit a point of like, okay, I think I need to watch something else. Like, you know what I mean? As cool as those movies are, I just would hit this point of like, yeah, I don't know if I can do more kung fu flicks. I don't know if that makes sense. But I haven't had like kung fu flick burnout like quite to the extent that I get superhero burnout. Like superhero burnout I have happened with comics, with movies. I don't know, you know. But every once in a while it's nice to, they're great to see, and I'll have seasons of like, yeah, this is the best thing. What's BTAS? Dylan said, I would guess. I haven't rewatched. I'm rewatching BTAS after finishing it. Let month. Okay. Paul said, I was never interested in superhero stuff in the first place. And then he said, too many original stories and characters. Seems like a shame to rehash superhero stuff over and over again. Yeah, that's kind of what that's kind of my view of it. It's like, I'd like to see some other genres, like, you know, I definitely relate to, was it Daniel Klaus who was saying like he kind of hated superhero movies, not movies, superhero comics. He felt like, why is this like the only kind of comic people read? Until like the recent times when, you know, that's all that dominates the box office. And he kind of came to terms with it because he was like, I guess that's just what people want. Like, they just want like capes and tights. There's something about capes and tights that people just really want. Whether it's dark capes and tights or happy capes and tights, people are just really into the capes and tights. But I'm a nerd for a bunch of other things, and I mean, who am I to speak? You know, I've just gotten back into watching sports, which I haven't been into in years, and like really enjoying baseball. And like, what is baseball but capes and tights? Like baseball. Baseball is a bunch of guys in capes and tights. I mean, without capes, but it's pretty much like a superhero, you know, genre. So I don't know, you know, what do I know? All right. We have Sophie in her very Victorian garb running into frame. And she's going to be casting a long shadow. The long shadow cast. That's Batman. Batman Shadows. Let's make a new Batman and call it Batman in the Shadows. The Dark Shadow. Shadow of... Oh, wait, there is a Batman that's Shadows. Shadow of the Bat. Like, how many Batmen can there be? Like, I don't know. I'm crazy here, but I feel like can we try something a little different? All right. All right, here we go. Okay, we're going to zoom out. What do I know? I'm an old guy from the era where our toys, our superhero toys, you'd squeeze their legs and they'd go oomph, oomph. like they literally have hands like this, and then you'd squeeze their legs, they go huh, huh. So much of movies is about money, it seems. Well, so much of everything's about money. You kind of wish it weren't so sometimes, you know? You can't fight the beast. The money beast. Just imagine, you know, trying to make art that's not commercial is literally like a superhero story of like fighting Mr. Monopoly, you know? Just imagine like, you know, the guy from Mr. Monopoly, which by the way, we found out on this stream, you know, in my head, when I think of Mr. Monopoly, right? The Monopoly guy, I think of him with a monocle, and like he didn't have one. And we found that out on here. And I think in my head, I've been confusing Mr. Peanut and Mr. Monopoly as the same person. These are the deep questions people should be thinking about rather than superhero comics. Why am I confusing Mr. Monopoly with Mr. Peanut? These are the important things, right? All right, we have 2 panels done. We're at the hour mark. I'm going to play a trailer. Batman Sonar sounds nice. Yeah, actually, that's not bad. Paul said you thought of a Batman that hasn't been done. Quite a feat. All right, guys. We're going to put on a trailer real quick. Since Paul's in the chats, we're going to play Paul Pate's trailer. So, here it is. I'll be right back.
There he is. My boy got the board all set up and ready to go.
You're late.
Yo, chill, my dude. I brought you something.
Brought me something? You feeling all right?
You like graphic novels?
Do I like graphic novels? Harrison, I'm the star of 3 graphic novels. You know, the Detective Perez series by author and illustrator Paul Pate. They're on sale at Amazon. You're in them too. They're set right here in Rust City.
Yeah, I'm hip to all those, but yo, you gotta check out this really dope one by Joshua Kemble.
Let me see.
Yo, this here is called Jacob's Apartment. It's about this young dude who shares an apartment with this girl he's trying to get with. Their romance is doomed from the start. Yo, I swear this could be about you, man.
Wow. The art in this is really nice.
That's nothing compared to this next one. It's a masterpiece.
What's this?
This is called Two Stories. It's a semi-autobiographical account of Kimball's childhood and early adulthood. He got picked on a lot as a kid, just like you.
Artwork in this is really beautiful. All black and white. Looks great.
The story is about how he struggled to adjust and sort of grow up in spite of being a dork, just like you. No offense.
Whatever, man. You got these for me?
Yeah, graphic novels by Joshua Kemble. Bought them right off of Amazon. Great stories, great art, just for you, my dude.
Well, thanks. I know it isn't easy for you. So I appreciate it. I look forward to reading them. First, sit down, yo move.
Welcome back. I think I had it muted for 2 seconds there. Dylan said, how long did it take you to create this, Paul? And Paul said, oh, a month maybe. I know, it's like an incredible animation. You guys really should check out the Detective Perez comics. They're amazing. Paul did an awesome job on that. And they're hefty books, right? So if you, like me, are experiencing superhero fatigue, and you want to check out some other genres in comics that aren't capes and tights, check out a cool detective fiction story, Detective Perez. They're great series. Excellent writing. They're hefty, chunky graphic novels. This graphic novel is nearly killing me, and it's like 200 pages, 200 and something pages long, and I'm already dying here at like 170. And double that, and that's a Paul Pate book. So, yeah, and they're affordable too. They're like, I think like, I don't know, the last I think when I bought them they were like $6 to $8 or something for a full story graphic novel with a beginning, middle, and end. Excellent characters, really great art. Check those out. But yeah, I still am amazed, Paul, that you made this amazing animation for me to show on my little channel here. Paul is a talent, I'm telling you, a huge talent. We're getting this this panel done. This was a tough one because the writer wanted Sophie wearing a bonnet, and we associate Sophie so much with that rose that I had to kind of figure a way to get that rose in there. So we just put the rose over the bonnet just because it's such a like staple that's kind of defines who she is. This one might take a couple passes to kind of really make work, but we'll see. Dylan said, I'm halfway through All in Aquaman by Tim's. Really liking it. Nice. That's a strange sounding name. All In. All in Aquaman. A little bit of a double entendre there. Anyhow, Aquaman's definitely one of those ones. I have never given Aquaman a chance. When I was a kid, that was like the one comic nobody wanted. Like, that's the comic your aunt would buy. This isn't saying Aquaman's bad. I'm just saying why I've never really looked into the Aquaman storyline. Because that was like the comic that, like, I don't know, like your aunt would buy or something to be like, you like comics? Here, have this. And you're like, oh man, Aquaman? I don't know. I don't think they did a great job with him early on. But to be honest, I never read an Aquaman comic because the character just never spoke to me. And if you think about it, he's a pretty powerful, interesting character. I almost feel like now if I was having to write a comic, I might want something like that, where it's like a character that people aren't super attached to, because you could do a lot with it to like reinvent it and not worry that, like, you know, these like swarms of like fans will come and like correct you on, no, Aquaman was originally like, you know, but anyhow, so I never really connected heavily with Aquaman as a character. But again, I wasn't really a DC kid, so there's that too, where like I tangentially like enjoyed DC characters, but mostly because of the movies, like not the books. And I think it was just the style of writing at the time, because when I was a kid, I feel like Marvel comics got more into like the characters like themselves. And again, this is just my perception at the time. I could be wrong, but it felt like Marvel comics were more about characters, character development, like who was the guy wearing the costume. And it felt like, you know, DC got more into really deep villains. Like they were really good with villains. But also more just like about like, this is the superhero and this is their power. And that was kind of like the big, like, to me, the focus on like what their abilities were and stuff felt like more of a Marvel, not a Marvel thing, more of a DC thing. So it felt like DC was doing more myths, you know, where it was about these almost like gods on Earth. And then Marvel was kind of doing like, these are humans who are putting on costumes and like, here's their stories, you know? And I think I just was drawn more, you know, like to stuff like Spider-Man, where it was like, okay, this is a kid who like, you know, is an outcast and a nerd. And we tell mostly stories about him, but then sometimes he fights bad guys, you know? That to me was more interesting as a kid. Or X-Men, where it's like, these are outcasts and, you know, here's their story. And then sometimes they'll fight Sentinels, you know? Super Friends destroyed Aquaman, said Dylan. And Paul was saying, I remember getting to page 170 of 200 and thinking it'll never end. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And then Paul was saying, like, they thought of every other superpower and went, let's give him superpowers, but put him underwater. It just, he always felt like the lamest character to me. You know, I don't know, like, I don't know, at the time, you know, even now I have that, like, I'm not saying he's a lame character, okay? I'm just saying I have that bias, like, built into me where I'm like, really? Like, Aquaman? Like, you know? Because it's like, as a kid, you know, you wanted toys of, like, every one of the Super Friends, except, like, if you got the Aquaman toy, you're like, oh, man, were they out of all the other heroes? Like, you know what I mean? He was like the one you didn't want to get, you know? Which actually makes me now, like, because, you know, like when my son got really into Pokemon, I instantly was like a big fan of Magikarp, who's notoriously that character that like people are like, oh man, I got a Magikarp card, you know, because it's like the weakest Pokemon. So now maybe with my my love of being you know, being a bit controversial with my takes, like you know, I feel like being a contrarian, it would be fun to like. I am a bit of a contrarian, so it would be fun to like Aquaman for that reason, because I feel like there's probably a lot of Aquaman hate out there, and it'd be fun to be like, no, actually it's like the best comic ever written. You know, he's actually the coolest character there is, like. Dylan said he's the only superhero I have a figure of. Aquaman's infant son died, I believe, in the 90s. I don't know. I'd have to give it a shot. Maybe in my superhero fatigue, you know what? Maybe it's because I haven't given Aquaman a chance. That might be why I'm feeling superhero fatigue. Dylan, you seem to have good taste, so I'm going to trust you on this. I'm guessing this run on Aquaman is amazing. I just never... like, I don't know, you know? I think it might have been because when I was a kid, too, like, The Little Mermaid came out and stuff, and, like, I don't know, you know? It's a mermaid, a merman, like, I don't know. It just doesn't sound super interesting to me. Which, by the way, I love the soundtrack to The Little Mermaid. I think Paul has witnessed me karaoke the soundtrack to The Little Mermaid. I absolutely adore that movie, but did I ever, as a kid, want to like want to be a mermaid? Not really, you know. It is cool though. Like, here's the thing. I could see that being a really rad comic because, like, I think I've even mentioned this on here. Like, there's so many cool, like, underwater type things. Like, I remember from the 80s. I don't know if you guys remember this. This was either the early 90s or the 80s. They all blur together to me. Do you guys remember The Abyss? Like, I haven't seen this movie in forever, but I remember my sister had a subscription to Lucasfilm magazine. And all these like special effects magazines that would like go behind the scenes to like Ghostbusters and like the different special effects and stuff. And a bunch of them went into The Abyss and how they did that, like head coming through, like the morph of the head, like forming from the water that comes into like their underwater thing. Like, anyhow. The Abyss was a cool movie when I was a kid. It was terrifying, the idea of like being that deep underwater. And then being underwater is really cool. Like, the things that are underwater are such interesting. Like, that would open up a lot of really interesting possibilities, but there's just something about Aquaman. I think it would be funny. Here's what I would do. If somebody gave me Aquaman, right? What I would do is, I have no idea what his origin story is. So now I'm going to give him a new origin story. So he's a guy who works. He's like the Sparklets water guy. Like, he drives, you know, the Sparklets water truck that has the little sparkles on the back. He drives the Sparklets water truck, and everybody calls him the Water Man. You know, it's kind of like the Water Boy. Everyone's teasing him for being the Water Man, right? And then eventually, you know, there's some freak accident happens at the water plant, and he becomes Aquaman with the power to control the ocean. And it's like the coolest thing. Like, he has these cool experiences, but then like every time he comes out of the cool experiences, everyone still treats him like, oh, you're Aquaman. And he's like, but I'm better than Waterman. And they're like, no, you're just Aquaman, dude. Like, there's no interest. No, but I saved the Earth by like going underwater and like fighting these undersea aliens, and people are like, "Yeah, I don't care." Like, That's how I would go about it if I was writing it. He'd be like a very sad waterworks employee who doesn't get respect, and he's a sad superhero who doesn't get respect. Oh, and he wouldn't even be able to come up with his own name in my story. Like, the name would be like given to him as like by like the gods underwater or something. Like, he'd go through some conflict and they'd be like, and to hold this evil force at bay and save humanity, you have to go by the name Aquaman. And he's like, not Waterman again. And they're like, no, not water, Aqua. I love this idea. Chris said The Abyss almost killed Ed Harris during filming. What about Ant-Man? Like, every other single animal was taken. Ant-Man was like, that movie was rad though. And like, there's something about Ant-Man that I think is great. And I would love to write something like Ant-Man because it is so lame. Like, inherently, it's just, it's so great and it's so awful at the same time that it's like, you know what I mean? Like, that's a title you'd want to do, but like Aquaman still just, there's something about it. Just, yeah, I don't know. You know? Have you seen The Abyss recently though? Because I wonder if it still holds up. I haven't watched that movie in years and I've been thinking about it. I think because Aquaman might have been brought up before. And it reminded me of like, oh, The Abyss was such a cool movie. Because if they did something like that, but then it's Aquaman, you know, like that would be pretty cool. Like, do like an underwater, like trapped in a submarine. You know what I mean? Like, you can do a lot of like deep water horror, you know? But then there's still something about it. Like, he's talking to animal. I don't know, man. I'm trying to figure out how to like Aquaman. But I respect that there are people out there who like him. And it sounds, Dylan, like somebody maybe did do something clever with it. Like, this recent run on it, did they do something really unique? It addresses that type of thing about him not being popular, not strong. Chris said Jason Momoa's badassery does a ton of heavy lifting in the movie version. They managed to turn it into an immigrant story along with some Arthurian royal mantle weighing heavy tones. Nice. Paul said, how about The Tick? They were so lazy they didn't even bother to put man after it. The Tick is great, though. Do I still have him? I usually have a little Tick bust right next to me, but I think things got moved around and he's not quite right next to me, but I have a little plastic Tick head. But The Tick was a parody of superhero comics, you know? The Tick was really funny. I think that was like, that predated like a lot of things when that first came out. I loved The Tick. My favorite episode of The Tick was I can't remember the specific villain, but it's like a villain that has like a chair for a head. I think he's just called like Chairhead or something. And and he comes up with a way where he's going to write his name on the moon, and then the Tick stops him, and all as far as he gets in writing his name on the moon is the word cha. And like, for the thing I loved about the Tick was that every episode after that, the moon would say cha on it. It was so good. It was such a dumb, wonderful, just amazing TV series. I have a soft spot for the Tick. I'll defend the Tick to the death. I never saw the live action though, but the animation was just so good, so good. And I love the idea of the premise of like, I think was it Arthur who's like the Tick's roommate, And just the idea of them having like typical roommate problems. Like, I don't know. It was a wonderful, wonderful show. I feel like whoever wrote, what is it? What's the show on Netflix right now? Not Netflix. It's on Amazon Prime, and it's like all cynical, dark superhero story. Oh, I think it's called The Boys. I feel like the premise of The Boys was somebody watching The Tick and going, "What if we did this, but for real?" You know? Because a lot of the superheroes in The Boys are kind of like very similar to The Tick, where they're very parodies of different superheroes and stuff. New Run Mira's powers were transferred to Aquaman, and he learned how to use them, like he can control blood. It's a more complex story, of course. So I get it. So this one, they were like, wait a minute. How did the last airbender make waterbenders cool? Oh, blood bending. We'll steal that. Is that what they did? I'm just teasing. But it does sound like somebody was watching, the good Avatar and was like, hey, like that's a pretty good idea. It's all good though. I think it would actually be pretty fun to do like a story like that. I feel like I got way too wild with this hair. If I can't tone it down, I might need to erase some of these lines. But if I put him kind of in shadow, I think it might take care of some of that, because he's going to be kind of a side figure here. I love that Cha was always on the backgrounds of the moon. Yeah, that was like my favorite bit from the entire thing. And also, the Tick would always go off on these like superhero rants. And Arthur would be like rolling his eyes. And whoever the voice actor was for the Tick was great. Like, I don't know who that voice actor is, but like the guy who did the voice of the Tick was just hilarious. Like that was an amazing show. I want to have him more in shadow. And then we'll kind of work our way out of it a little bit. But I think the Tick came out around the same time as like Freakazoid, which was really fun. I have fond memories of all those things. None of which I've like rewatched recently, so again, some of them may not hold up as well as they do in my head. Kind of reworking some of this because it just doesn't look right. Don't know why all of a sudden my shading is not on point here. Okay, we're getting there. I think we've got like the dark kind of pass here is starting to work a little better, so that's good. Yes, okay, very cool. Since everyone here has been reading comics for a year, when you first started out reading, did it feel weird reading them in public? When I was younger, like comics were very uncool for a little bit. And then I remember the image boom happened in junior high. And so suddenly, like, a lot of the cool kids were all of a sudden reading comics and asking me tips and stuff on like different things because they were like, wow, this is so cool. But yeah, there was a good like my fifth and sixth grade when I got heavy into comics. I do remember it being like a thing you'd kind of hide. Like you'd hide in your backpack and then people would tease you about it, you know? But then there were a couple things that happened. Like one was Tim Burton's Batman making it a little cool again. And then, but in general, it was like we were kind of a minority, like the comic readers. But the plus side of that was, if you saw another kid, because it was so rare to meet people who read comics, because it was so rare, I made a lot of like friends that are still friends to this day in elementary school and junior high, just based on comics. Like, one of my closest friends, I talk about this a little bit, but, one of my closest friends, Jake, he's our drummer actually for No Saboteurs, but him and his brother, Josh, I met him through comics because we both like drawing comic characters and making comics together. And then, and I think I saw him, I think the comic I saw him reading was Ghost Rider. And I was like, oh, cool. Because Ghost Rider was rad. Like, especially to like a fifth grader, like a flaming skull on a motorcycle was pretty awesome. And then, yeah, and then like a lot of my really good friends from junior high that I'm still friends with to this day, like I remember one of them saw that I was drawing my own comics in seventh grade. I was drawing like my own comic character, and he was like, "Oh, you draw comics? Like, here's a list of characters and their superpowers that I made." And like they had like a little notebook where he was like writing different superhero ideas down, and he was like, "Could you draw these with me?" And I was like, "Yeah, we could start like a comic company." You know, like, so it's like, anyhow, but yeah, back then like cool people were not tending to read comics. There was this brief period during the image boom where you know, more people had an interest in it. But yeah, yeah, it never was like a cool thing. I feel like now though, I could care less what people, I never really cared what people think, but I care way less now. Like now that I'm an adult, dude, if you want to judge me for reading a comic book, I don't care. You know? I think Corey had a funny story of like when he was when he was teaching at university. He was at like some big faculty meeting, and they're like, "What are you reading?" And everybody's talking about these like heavy books, and Corey was like, "Well, I've been reading Batman," and they all kind of looked at him like, "What?" And he just pulled the graphic novel like out of his bag and was like, "Yeah, it's really good," and just started. And I guess like, you know, initially like people just kind of accept it. Chris said it was a small group of kids that like comics in middle school. Definitely not popular. Quite a bonding time. But I think that was the cool thing. Comics and like D&D, things like that were like, they were like ways to find your tribe. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but even my wife, like we met, you know, because we both were really into similar comics and stuff. And like, I don't know. It's comics are a uniting, beautiful thing. They help you find your tribe, you know. But I would say the same for books. Like when I was a kid, you know, I read a lot of novels and stuff. I remember in junior high, just the fact that I had novels, like especially fantasy novels, because I was like really into like the Dragon Riders of Pern series, and I think at that time reading all of the oh my gosh, I'm blanking out, like the Restaurant at the End of the Universe and like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and before the movies came out, like all the Tolkien books and stuff. And so it's like these were things I would like bring with me to school and read at school, and oh my gosh, I would get teased so much for reading, you know, because they'd be like, look at this nerd over here reading books. Like, you know, like yeah. I feel like reading in general, but then comics just put you in this other class where it's like, yeah, you just never looked cool reading back in the day. They tried to make it cool, you know, with things like Reading Rainbow and stuff, but I think Harry Potter was the first time that I saw where there was like a cultural acceptance of like people reading. Paul said, at MSU, there's a comics professor and you can minor in comics. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, like comics are much more acceptable now. When I was going to college, I even had to justify picking graphic novels as something I wanted to go into, you know, which is weird in an illustration program, you know. But a lot of them were like, yeah, those aren't art. And I had to like defend comics, you know. Now it's like you don't get that as often. Now it's like I think people are pretty accepting of the fact that like comics are a form of storytelling and art. Especially now that like, you know, almost everything in Hollywood is superhero based. I think like the idea that comics are some weird thing is like kind of flown out the window now. But I do remember this weird period where Spawn was super cool. Like, it really kind of didn't... Like, if you had an issue of Spawn on campus, like, nobody was teasing you. They'd just be like, what is that? Where did you get it? Where can I get it? Like, there was something McFarlane tapped into that, like, touched the souls of, like, junior high and freshmen. Because I do remember that one being the one that if I brought on campus, like, people wouldn't tease me about it. They'd just be like, where did you get that? And how can I get that? Just because like the painted covers and the chains and like just his costume was like the coolest thing, I think, at the time. So Spawn was like the one acceptable comic you could have where like a bunch of jocks were reading it. It was surprising. Like the image boom really did expand comics readership for a little bit there. Paul said, I think it's cool that there are comics programs, though. That's awesome. I want to be a comics professor. Sounds fun. At some point, I would like to start like a comics course at the school I teach at. But starting a course is always tough because you need to ensure enrollment. But I think we'd have interest in it. I think we could at least do one period, you know. But I'd have to like build the curriculum and pitch it. But that's definitely something I'd like to do long term. Definitely. Because I do feel like that should be kind of its own class. And how cool would that be if in high school you could have had a class on just comics, just making comics? But that also gets into all sorts of stuff because we'd have to get into like state standards, making sure it meets state standards, all that kind of stuff. But I think that would be a cool elective to build for sure. And that's definitely something, you know, after I'm tenured, I'd like to build or try to. That'd be fun. Chris was saying a huge chunk of projects being greenlit in film and TV or book adaptation of some type. Yeah, for sure. Which, again, is like, it's good and it's bad, you know? I think a lot of the book adaptation stuff is just, it's a way for it's a way for people to mitigate risk, you know? I think most of what business people are doing is they're trying to invest in something that is a low risk investment. And so what better way than take something that's already successful and make it a movie, you know? So you can kind of use like books or comics as like a trial run, see if it hits. And if it's a hit, then why wouldn't you, you know, adapt it? It also has advantages of being easier to visualize. So like, you know, I think why movie pitches are so popular to be done in graphic novels is like, it just gives you the entire thing. It's like, no, you don't have to imagine it. Here's the movie made, right? But it's done. Now, I personally am not a fan of comics that are just made to be adapted into movies. Like, I personally think comics are their own art form. I think we're all in agreement there, where I think comics are possibly a superior art form to movies. But at the same time, like, most people don't view it that way. And you can see why, like, executives would be like, wow, okay, I can visualize this whole thing. Like, I can see how much it would cost. I can see the locations. I can see, you know, possible casting, costumes. It's all kind of worked out here. So we just have to like really just kind of adapt this thing, but it's already there. You know, you can kind of see why, especially for non-creatives, why that would be so helpful. Because to a creative, like, you can kind of describe something and they can imagine it. But one thing I've started realizing as I've gotten older is not everybody practices using their imaginations like creatives do. And so, like, if you describe a plot to me, because I write, it's like, oh, I can visualize that and I can imagine where we could go with that. And like, same with if you described a logo to me or like an illustration, if you just described it in words, like, I can start imagining what it would look like, right? But there's a whole chunk of people out there who really don't know it till they see it, you know? And so for that type of imagination too, I think having a book or especially a comic, you know, where you don't have to really imagine it. It's right there. I can see why that becomes like a really popular thing to adapt. That mixed with the fact that, like, if it's already successful as a comic, like, your likelihood of it being successful as a film is probably pretty high, you know, and risk aversion in Hollywood. Yeah, Dylan was saying you essentially have the storyboards right there. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, comics are, it's a smart investment. Like, it's smart for, like, if I was a person producing a film where, like, because that's easy to be critical of, right? But it's like, well, what if it was your pocketbook, you know? Like, if somebody was like, hey, can you give me 100 million of your hard-earned dollars? Like, can you, you know, mortgage your house to produce this thing for us? You know what I mean? Like, if you kind of humanize it, you can see why people want to go with a sure thing, you know, because it's like, yeah, that is asking somebody a lot to take a risk on an idea. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm a big fan of risks on ideas. That's why I do these like weird artsy comics. You know, these are huge time investments with often very little return, but not everybody's built like that, you know? And so, like, yeah, being able to ease the mind of the benefactors, you know, the Medici families, like, you know, commissioning this stuff. I think it's an easier sell to say, hey, here's this book. It sold this many numbers. It's already popular with this many people. We can tap into that same market. Or just say, hey, I know it's a long stretch, you know, like Road to Perdition would be a good example. It's like, hey, this is a long stretch, but look at this story and how beautiful it is. We could shoot it exactly like this, you know, and then we'll get a big name actor to help it sell, like Tom Hanks, you know. You can see why that was like a no-brainer, because it's like the graphic novel is so well done that you can see why they were like, oh, this would be a really good movie. And the budget's not crazy on it, right? Like the costuming, all of that is like, it's not like a crazy investment for like a film studio. Whereas if you had Road to Perdition, the script, it's like, oh, another mob story, you know? I don't know if that makes sense, but... Paul said, oh boy, here goes Josh with his art eugenics again. Comics is superior. I don't think comics really are superior. I think just for me, for my tastes, I prefer a comic. The problem is I don't get to read many comics. And I think this is probably a common story with cartoonists where it's like, dude, how many of us who make comics have time to read comics? Because you like when you're making them, how am I going to read a comic right now? Like I could totally listen to a book. I could listen to the soundtrack of a movie, right? But a comic would be a hard sell right now to be like, oh, read this comic while you're working on comics. It's like, but I have to say, like the you know, a perfect example. I always talk about Chris Ware. It's like what Jimmy Corgan. The reason I love Chris Ware is what Jimmy Corgan, the smartest kid on earth, what that book did. There's no book or novel or movie that can do what that book did. Like it just did something entirely unique that only can be done in comics. And if they tried to make a movie of it, I'd be so disappointed because you literally couldn't turn a Chris Ware book into a movie. You can kind of animate some of his ideas, but like I just do not see a Chris Ware, like a Rusty Brown movie. Like there's just too much interior things happening, too many things that are like a diary. It's just too intimate. And I think that's why I love Chris Ware so much, is like he's a key example of like you really, he's doing things that only can be done in comics. And I want to try to do more of that. However, I will say Not Death But Love, the strange supernatural story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, would make an excellent movie. That's why somebody out there, you know, after reading it should give my sister and I like ridiculous option money and make that thing happen. You know, I'm just saying we have it all pre-visualized. You know, we have all the staging, all the costumes. You know, I don't think it would be a bad thing. Trying to get that option money, guys. I want that option money. Wachowski's had to get art made specially to pitch the film. Yeah, it makes sense too. Cause like what a crazy, like how hard would that have been? I think a lot of the time with sci-fi stuff, you need really solid art. You know, Blade Runner 2 like needed really good art to kind of sell it. But yeah, comics as a pitch makes sense. I just think I don't think it's bad to even option a comic, but I think the main goal anybody should have when they do comics is make a good comic. Like it shouldn't be about, I'm going to make this thing that'll then make a really great movie. If it gets optioned, cool. Right. But like, I don't know. There's a specific genre of comics or cartoonists that I've met, you know, especially at Comic-Cons, and I'm sure you guys have met these guys too, who like they get a booth and stuff like that, and you realize like after talking to them, like all they're trying to do is option a movie. Like that's literally their main goal. And like that to me is lame. Like, and it rarely leads to really good comics in my experience. So I like, again, I would focus on making the best thing you can in the medium you're doing it in, and then maybe if it gets made into a movie, cool. But the movie shouldn't be the end all be all of the thing. Dylan said, "Did Alien need art to sell the idea?" I feel like Alien was. Am I crazy? I feel like Alien was so based on H.R. Geiger. Like, I think the whole thing was really contingent on Geiger. Like, I can't remember it, but I think he was like a big part of the whole sell of it was H.R. Geiger. But I can also see there's a couple of logistical reasons why I can see why like books or movies or graphic novels like are really good pitch ready things. Another thing is like, quite often somebody will have something that they write down, right? You guys will experience this too. I've experienced this for sure in working on this comic where, I'm collaborating with a writer. And it's like they'll write stuff and it's like what sounds good in writing when you block it out, like sometimes just doesn't work. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's times where when you're storyboarding, you have to kind of consult the person writing the script and being like, okay, what do you want to do here? Because what you're saying sounds good, but it's impossible. Like it can't exist in perspective. Like, or like this is way too many actions. We got to boil it down. And imagine the amount of work that it takes to like take a script that's just like a concept, right? And like they're maybe describing things that like visually just aren't as coherent as they sound. Like once the rubber meets the road, it's like, oh, this is like way more complicated and expensive visually than we thought it would be. That adds a lot of understanding behind like why you would board something out or pay a storyboard artist to do it, or better yet, like hire, like option a graphic novel. Cause it's like, they've already worked out the visuals. They've worked out all the kinks and figured out how to tell the story visually, which, you'll know, like when you do comics, it's like telling a story verbally is a lot different than telling a story visually. Like, writing something coherent in English is a little different than writing it coherently to where it visually makes sense. Like making it visually make sense and working all that out. That's a big part of making comics. Like, it's one of the biggest challenges to making comics. You're not just drawing pretty pictures. You're trying to make a story work visually. And it's like, somebody's already done the work with that. So I can definitely, even with that, see the appeal to, a producer or something who's worked on films, worked from scripts, and realizes like, oh, a lot of the time, this stuff that sounds like it'll visually work doesn't. And so like, if you have somebody who already went through all the hassle of like figuring that all out. Oh, Chris said, you remember those funny H.R. Giger comic bits? They're so silly. Yeah, I love those. Those are from Super Ego. There is an old podcast called Super Ego. And I think one of the main guys from Super Ego actually is on Conan O'Brien's podcast now. I think that's his main thing now. But like Matt Gorley. But they had one of the best H.R. Giger bits, and it's like H.R. Giger. My favorite one is it's just a sketch, like a comedic, improv sketch, but it's like basically H.R. Giger's son like asking his dad for a permission slip to like go on a trip at school, and it's just like. Where it'd be like, "Hello, son. Welcome to my black jelly bean world of darkness." In the it's just so silly. It's very funny, but it's like anyhow, if you guys ever want to see a funny bit about H.R. Giger, look up Super Ego H.R. Giger. Those are great sketches. They're so funny. And what's funny is if you ever see an interview with Giger, like the guy who does the impression, it's just the funniest thing I've ever heard. Dylan said, when I first came up with the idea of creating an absolute Aquaman fanfic, I immediately wanted to pull from Alien as an inspiration. Look, I'm saying if you do Aquaman, you go one of two routes. One is he's a depressed water worker, right? Who just can't escape. He's just like he's like the comedian who's just like, I get no respect. Like everywhere he goes, like nobody respects him. As a superhero, nobody respects him. Like he just gets no respect. He like saves the world and he gets no respect. Like that kind of thing. Or you go real like crazy psychological underwater horror. I think that would be the best route. Like if you had to reinvent Aquaman, yeah, go dark horror, like underwater, you know, all the fear of the ocean stuff. With Aquaman, you know? So yeah, you should totally go Giger style, right? Have like just crazy undersea creatures and like the depths of the sea horror and, you know, deal with all the stuff like, what is it? Like the decompression chambers that like divers have to go underwater and stuff. I think that would be the way to go. Just play into like make him like Batman, where like Batman is like basically a villain based story. Make Aquaman just have some excellent villains, you know, and give him a little less power. Like, you know, make it so his powers run out sometimes underwater or something, you know. I haven't seen the Aquaman movies, so maybe they went that route, you know, but that's the way I would go. I would go like, you know, dark, you know, the abyss, but with Aquaman, you know. All right. We're getting closer. I want to add a little more shadow under his on his side so it matches up, but I think we are pretty much done with shading this page. So let's finish up his side here. And then we can at some point, maybe later tonight, I might do a stream while I color. But for now, I'm going to take a break and eat some food because it's dinner time here. How are you guys doing? Hopefully you guys are doing well. Hopefully you're having a lovely Sunday. I appreciate you could be anywhere today. You could be watching anything. You could be watching Aquaman right now. And yet you guys have chosen to spend your hard-earned time with me, and I appreciate that. Let me go ahead and finish this up. We'll merge it. I appreciate you guys keeping me company and keeping my mind active while I'm working on these pages. It is awesome. Okay, let's merge these. Let's get those lines disappeared. Merge these. Shading. Label the layer. And you guys got me through an entire page of shading. So thank you so much. Appreciate you guys. Dylan said a coloring stream would be fun. Paul said Aquaman porn was a flop. Oh, Edie said it rained today here in NYC. Cold front is coming through tomorrow and Tuesday. All right, well, be safe. Stay bundled up. Stay warm. What else? Jim just said hello. Jim, how's it going? Let's see what else. Gothua man. I'm sure somebody must have done Goth Man, you know. That would be a good superhero. All right, guys. I will see you on the coloring stream. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get notifications when I'm about to go live. I appreciate you guys. And also, if you want to listen to some cool music, some hip music that the kids are into, all the kids that are cool, listen to this amazing music. Check out Joshua Kemble Empty Rooms on music streaming platforms everywhere. You can check it out on YouTube. You can check it out on Spotify. You can even buy it on Apple Music. So check that out. And also consider picking up Jacob's Apartment and 2 Stories, my 2 graphic novels. I'll see you guys on the next